The boarding process at John F. Kennedy International Airport was as routine as ever. The shuffle of impatient travelers clutching boarding passes, the tinny announcements from the loudspeaker, and the hollow thud of rolling suitcases over the carpet. No one noticed her when she moved through the gate, blending seamlessly into the crowd. She wasn't dressed to stand out. Dark jeans, a simple jacket, and a scarf knotted casually around her neck. In her hand, she carried a folded paper itinerary, a tourist's guidebook to Washington, D.C., and a slim leather shoulder bag that looked almost too ordinary. Her seat assignment, 22C, aisle seat, middle of the cabin. Forgettable. That's how she preferred it. She smiled politely as she squeezed past an older woman fumbling with an oversized tote bag, murmured a quick, "Excuse me," in a soft voice, and slid into her seat. She placed the guidebook in the seat pocket, buckled her belt, and leaned back. To her left, at the window, a young college student snapped selfies with the wing in the background. To her right, across the aisle, a father tried to calm his restless toddler. To anyone watching, she was no different than the hundreds of other passengers bound for Washington that evening. But somewhere in the labyrinth of databases and government watch lists, her name glowed like a flare. The airline's manifest had triggered a hidden protocol the moment she checked in. The algorithm, built for counterterrorism years ago, cross-referenced every passenger against dormant files. And when her name came up, an old designation appeared beside it, a call sign long thought buried. At the time of boarding, no one had yet connected the dots. Not the gate agent who scanned her pass. Not the flight attendant who greeted her with a mechanical smile. Not even the fellow passengers, who were too distracted with phones and carry-ons to notice anything unusual about her presence. She rested her head against the seatback and closed her eyes, listening to the steady hum of boarding noises around her. Her breathing was calm, almost meditative. Anyone watching might have assumed she was a seasoned traveler, one who had learned the art of tuning out the chaos of airports. But her stillness wasn't just habit, it was practice. Years of conditioning had taught her how to remain invisible. In plain sight, how to control the rhythm of her own body when tension crept in. When the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing a short delay for final baggage loading, she opened her eyes again. The corners of her mouth turned upward, ever so slightly. Patience had once been her greatest weapon, and tonight, patience would serve her again. The young student at the window struck up small talk. "First time to D.C.?" he asked, holding up his camera as if ready to document every moment. She tilted her head, considering her response carefully, then nodded. "Yes, just visiting. Thought I'd finally see the monuments up close." Her voice was light, casual, just the right shade of curiosity one might expect from a tourist. The student seemed satisfied and returned to his photos, chattering to his social media followers about the trip of a lifetime. The truth was far more complicated. She had been to Washington before many times, though never as a tourist. Her visits had been conducted under aliases, her movements tightly choreographed, her meetings shadowed by unmarked cars and watchful eyes. She had walked the city's marble halls not as a visitor, but as someone navigating the currents of power. From the shadows, the monuments, the museums, the grandeur, she had barely noticed them. What had mattered then were sealed briefcases, whispered promises, and the knowledge that her actions rippled far beyond her sight. Tonight, however, she carried none of the tools of that former life. No encrypted phone, no false documents, no weapon tucked discreetly under her clothes. All she had was a tourist's bag, a camera, and a guidebook with dog-eared pages. That was the disguise, and it had to hold. As the engines roared and the plane began its taxi, she folded her hands in her lap and stared at the floor. Every vibration, every shift in momentum, she absorbed with the instinct of someone trained to measure details others ignored. She counted seconds between the captain's announcements, noted the subtle creak in the overhead bin above, memorized the flight attendant's nervous smile when the toddler began to cry. Old habits refused to die. When the aircraft lifted into the air, breaking free of the runway, she let her eyes close again. The sensation of ascent, the press of gravity against her body, reminded her of another time when flights like these had been preludes to missions that changed the course of nations. She had thought those days were over. The family beside her barely noticed her silence. To them, she was just another weary passenger. Yet if they had leaned closer, if they had studied the faint scar along her wrist or the way her fingers tapped, unconsciously in rhythmic intervals, they might have suspected there was more beneath the surface. Hours passed in relative calm. Flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle, offering plastic cups of soda and tiny bags of pretzels. Passengers adjusted seats, flipped through magazines, or lost themselves in glowing screens. At 30,000 feet, anonymity was easy. She took a sip of water, glanced out the window over the student's shoulder, and let her mind drift. But on the ground, far below, anonymity was no longer an option. In a secure operations room, a young analyst frowned at his monitor. He had been running routine cross-checks of flight manifests, a monotonous job designed to flag expired visas or persons of interest. When her name appeared, he expected nothing unusual. Yet there it was linked to a call sign coded in scarlet. His supervisor, alerted, leaned in. Within minutes, the room filled with murmurs, and within an hour, a chain of phone calls reached the highest levels of command. The call sign should not have existed anymore. It was supposed to have been retired, archived, sealed. And yet the system recognized it as active, which meant officially the woman in seat 22C was not a tourist at all. She was an operative with presidential-level clearance. On the plane, she shifted slightly in her seat, sensing without knowing. The student offered her a stick of gum for the cabin pressure, and she accepted it with a small smile. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, stars flickering faintly against the dark horizon. No one around her realized that the course of their flight and their lives was about to change forever. The climb into cruising altitude was smooth, almost deceptively so. The captain's voice filled the cabin with standard reassurances. We'll be at 30,000 feet in just a few minutes. Weather looks favorable along our route to Washington. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. The words washed over the passengers like a lullaby. Seatbelts clicked loose, overhead bins were opened and shut, and a wave of chatter replaced the takeoff silence. The young man at the window snapped more photos of the clouds, adding hashtags to his stream of posts. The father across the aisle coaxed his toddler to sleep with a whispered lullaby. It was all so ordinary, but beneath the surface, currents were shifting. She sat motionless in 22C, her face calm, but her senses wide awake. Years of training had sharpened her instincts, and something subtle was already out of place. It began with the first-class cabin. At first glance, the passengers seated in the premium rows looked like the usual mix of business travelers. Tailored suits, glowing laptops, glasses of wine perched on fold-out trays. But the longer she observed, the more her eyes narrowed. Two men in particular drew her attention. One sat near the front, pretending to read a financial report. His posture was too rigid, his eyes scanning the cabin in patterns, not paragraphs. Another, across the aisle from him, wore a navy blazer and tapped his fingers against his leg in a rhythm she recognized instantly. Not nervousness communication. Morse. Subtle, nearly invisible, but unmistakable. She leaned back slowly, pretending. Disinterest. To the untrained eye, they were businessmen. To her, they were watchers. The turbulence began as a faint rattle, nothing alarming at first. The plane shuddered gently, cups wobbling on tray tables. The captain's voice crackled overhead again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering a patch of rough air. Please, fasten your seatbelts for the next several minutes." The college student beside her groaned, securing his camera. The toddler cried as his father tightened their belts. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the cabin as overhead lights flickered. But turbulence wasn't what set her nerves on edge. As the aircraft jolted, the two men in first class both touched their watches, synchronized, deliberate. Seconds later, a faint tone pulsed through the cabin intercom, so faint most passengers ignored it. But she heard it, felt it, the way only someone attuned to coded signals could. It wasn't part of the turbulence. It was a test, a signal bouncing quietly across channels. She inhaled slowly, steadying her pulse. The disguise of a tourist was good: her clothes, her bag, her guidebook. But no disguise could protect her from recognition if the right people were watching. The plane jolted again, harder this time, drawing startled gasps. Luggage rattled overhead. A soda spilled across a tray table, and a child wailed. The captain's voice returned, too calm, almost strained. "We've been given an updated course from air traffic control. Nothing to be concerned about. We'll adjust our heading slightly." That was the moment her suspicions crystallized. Planes did not simply adjust course without reason, not at this altitude, not without more explanation. She had flown too often under too many circumstances to mistake coincidence for routine. Air traffic control had given an order. The turbulence was real enough, but the diversion, that was something else. She glanced out the window. Beyond the wing, stars dotted the night sky. The moon hung low, casting silver streaks across the clouds. For now, nothing unusual. But she knew better than to trust appearances. Somewhere out there, unseen radar screens were lighting up. Across the aisle, a flight attendant whispered urgently into the intercom phone, her hand shielding her mouth. Another attendant passed briskly down the aisle, checking latches, her eyes darting nervously. Passengers were beginning to notice. Whispers spread in low tones. "Did you hear that? A new course? What's going on? Is this normal?" The student beside her muttered, "We better not be delayed. I've got a tour booked first. Thing in the morning." He chuckled, oblivious, tapping away at his phone. She didn't answer. Her attention had shifted to the faint reflection in the window. The man in first class, who had been tapping Morse code, was now staring straight back at her. Not at the student, not at the family across the aisle at her. Recognition. Her jaw tightened, though her expression remained neutral. She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. For a fraction of a second, his lips twitched upward, a knowing smile. Then he returned to his documents, pretending to read once more. The air felt heavier. The turbulence subsided after several minutes, but the unease lingered. The captain's voice returned, firmer this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your cooperation as we follow updated directives. Please remain in your seats." Directives. Not weather, not traffic. Directives. She leaned back in 22C, closing her eyes as though tired, but her mind raced. If the system had flagged her name, then Washington already knew. Protocol demanded immediate notification up the chain. Department of Homeland Security, Pentagon, possibly even the White House. If her call sign had resurfaced, the response would not be mild. Somewhere far below, phones were ringing in secure offices. Men and women in dark suits were gathering around glowing screens, and the calm exterior of the flight was already an illusion. The woman in 22C was no longer anonymous. The child across the aisle whimpered again. The father tried to soothe him with a gentle song. Passengers fidgeted in restless discomfort, unaware of the scale of the drama unfolding around them. For now, she kept still. She had learned long ago that silence could be the most powerful shield. But deep in her chest, something stirred. Memory of the mission she had left unfinished, the one that had branded her with a call sign she thought forgotten. It wasn't forgotten, not at all. The sky above them stretched vast and empty, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Soon, the silence of the night would be broken by the roar of engines not belonging to their commercial flight. Soon, this ordinary journey to Washington would become something no passenger would ever forget. And in 22C, the so-called tourist, was bracing for the moment when her past would come screaming back through the clouds. At 31,000 feet, the cabin had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Some passengers dozed with headphones pressed against their ears, while others fidgeted with seatbelts, unable to shake the odd tension hanging in the recycled air. The plane had already adjusted course once, and though the captain insisted it was routine, the shift had unsettled them. In 22C, she sat perfectly still, her eyes half closed, her mind listening for details others couldn't hear. A creak in the fuselage, a change in engine tone, the faint static of radio chatter bleeding through the intercom. None of it escaped her. Then, somewhere far below, a confirmation came through. In a secure room within the Pentagon, a young officer stared at the glowing screen before him. His voice trembled as he read the flagged manifest aloud. Passenger identified, female, age 36, traveling under civilian cover. Call sign Athena. The word silenced the room. Athena. It was a name buried in files so classified, most of the men in the room had never heard it before. A name connected to operations never declassified, missions written off as rumors, and a woman whose existence had been erased. The officer superior snatched the report, scanning quickly. His jaw tightened. "Verify the call sign," he ordered. "It's verified, sir. Active. Impossible. And yet there it was. Active. Which meant protocol was clear. Within minutes. Encrypted lines buzzed. NORAD confirmed the alert. Andrews Air Force Base scrambled fighters. The chain of command pushed upward until it reached the Oval Office. The president, still in a late briefing, froze at the word. Athena. "Get her secured," he said simply. And so, the sky around Flight 223 began to change. At first, the passengers noticed only a distant glimmer of light on the horizon. A child, near the back, pressed his nose against the window, pointing excitedly. "Mom, look, another plane!" His mother hushed him, distracted by the beverage cart, but the glimmer grew. 2, then 4, streaks of silver tearing through the night sky, closing in fast. Within minutes, they were flanking the aircraft. Sleek, predatory, unmistakable, F-15 Eagles. Gasps rippled through the cabin as passengers craned necks toward the windows. Phones clicked, recording shaky footage. Some laughed nervously, assuming it was a training exercise. Others clutched armrests, their eyes wide with panic. The captain's voice returned, calm but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, there is no cause for alarm. We are being escorted as a matter of standard protocol." His words fell flat. Standard protocol? Commercial flights did not receive fighter escorts unless something was terribly wrong. The student beside her pressed his face against the glass, his voice hushed with awe. "Oh my God, we're being escorted. Is this about terrorists?" She did not answer. Her gaze flicked briefly to the fighter jet's insignia glinting in the moonlight. The angle of its formation, the precision of its movements. This wasn't routine. This was protection or containment. Panic spread in whispers. "Are we under attack? Is someone dangerous on board? What's happening?" Flight attendants hurried down the aisles, their professional smiles. cracking under the strain. Please remain calm. Please stay seated. Their voices betrayed them, brittle with fear. Across the cabin, the two men in first class, the watchers, exchanged another glance. One reached into his blazer, fingers brushing the outline of something concealed. The other tapped the side of his leg again, a Morse rhythm deliberate. She caught it, confirmed, target identified. Her pulse quickened. They weren't simply passengers. They were here for her. And yet she remained still. The woman in 22C folded her hands neatly in her lap, as though she hadn't noticed the chaos around her. In truth, her mind was calculating, weighing options, rehearsing outcomes. Years ago, she had prepared for this very moment. She had known that the call sign would one day come back to haunt her, that the system would never fully let go of its ghosts. But she hadn't expected it like this, on a civilian flight, in plain sight of tourists and children, with the entire cabin spiraling into fear. The plane jolted slightly as the fighters tightened their formation. Outside, one jet tilted its wing, a signal. Inside the cockpit, the captain received instructions he dared not repeat aloud. The passengers demanded answers. "Captain, what's happening? Tell us the truth. Are we safe?" In 22C, she sat with perfect composure. The man in first class slipped an earpiece discreetly into place. His lips moved, barely audible. Athena confirmed. "Orders?" He listened, then nodded once. His eyes flicked back to her. Recognition, absolute. For the first time in years, she was no longer invisible. The student at the window noticed her stillness. "Hey, you're awfully calm about all this. Aren't you scared?" She turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. "Fear doesn't change the outcome," she said softly. The words puzzled him. To her, they were a mantra. Around them, the cabin buzzed with panic, phones recording, prayers whispered. The fighter jets outside gleamed like predators circling prey. And the woman in 22C, the so-called tourist, sat silently in the eye of the storm. She was no tourist. She was Athena. And the sky had just declared it to the world. The plane trembled as the fighters drew closer, their engines growling low against the night sky. Passengers pressed against the windows, eyes wide as though they'd stepped into a movie. A woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering prayers. Someone tried to laugh, too loudly, too nervously. "Guess we've got VIPs on board, huh?" But the sound died quickly. The atmosphere was wrong. This wasn't an honor guard. This was containment. In 22C, Athena still masked as a tourist watched the reflections of silver wings flash against the cabin walls. Her expression betrayed nothing. Her hands rested lightly on the folded guidebook in her lap, as though she were absorbed in travel plans. But her mind was sharp, calculating. The fighter jets weren't alone. Minutes later, the captain's voice came again, steadier now, but carrying weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We've been instructed to follow a special route into Washington. Everything is under control." The word "special route" sent a shiver through her. She knew exactly what that meant. Somewhere ahead in the night sky, cloaked by distance and altitude, Air Force One was on its own course toward Andrews. The escort wasn't random, it was deliberate. This wasn't just about confirming her identity. This was about aligning her path with the president's. Passengers speculated in frantic whispers. Why Air Force jets? Is there a terrorist on board? Do you think it's about politics? Phones lit up as shaky hands tried to connect to weak in-flight Wi-Fi. But even as tweets flew into the digital void, the truth was sealed above them, invisible to the public eye. Athena closed her eyes briefly. A flood of memory rushed in, unbidden. Flashback. A quiet room in Langley, years ago. A wooden table, 3 men in suits, 1 woman in a Navy uniform. The mission briefing was curt. You'll be given a call sign. Athena. Once you carry it, it doesn't leave you. She had nodded, young and unscarred, eager to serve. She hadn't understood then what it meant to carry a name like that, how it would outlive her, haunt her. The missions had been silent, executed in shadows, far from headlines. She had walked foreign markets with hidden transmitters, shared coded drinks in dim cafes, shaken hands with men who smiled with knives behind their backs. Each time, Athena walked away. Each time, a piece of her stayed behind. The last mission had been the hardest. 1 document left undelivered. 1 promise left unkept. And then she vanished, buried under layers of false identities, until even she believed she was gone. The turbulence snapped her back to the present. The jet dipped slightly, wings adjusting as the Escort shifted tighter. Gasps filled the cabin again. Across the aisle, a passenger muttered, "This can't be real. This doesn't happen." But it was happening. 2 rows ahead, the man in the navy blazer, the Morse tapper, lifted his phone, angling it like he was checking messages. She saw the reflection in his screen, her own face, captured discreetly. He was confirming her for someone else. Sending proof. Athena exhaled slowly. She didn't flinch, didn't react. If she showed awareness, the entire cabin could erupt. She had to maintain the mask. The college student beside her was practically buzzing with excitement. "Do you see this? This is insane. We're in the middle of some government thing. I just know it." He fumbled with his phone, angling it toward the window for a video. "I'm gonna go viral." Athena gave him a faint smile, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Viral was the least of their problems. The captain's voice returned, firmer now. "Flight crew, please take your seats. We are under military escort and will be maintaining altitude until further notice." The cabin erupted. Passengers demanded answers. "Military escort? Why us? Is there a bomb? Tell us the truth." Flight attendants struggled to calm them, their voices cracking. The toddler across the aisle began to wail uncontrollably, his father rocking him helplessly. And yet, in the middle of it all, Athena remained composed. Her stillness was magnetic, so calm it unnerved those who noticed. The Morse tapper's companion in first class whispered something into his collar, his lips barely moving. Seconds later, Athena felt it, eyes locking onto her from across the cabin. Recognition again. Confirmation. There was no hiding anymore. She tilted her head slightly, letting her gaze meet his for the briefest instant. No words, no gesture, just acknowledgement. "Yes, you found me." The man blinked, then looked away. His mission wasn't confrontation. Not yet. His mission was to make sure she got to Washington alive. Outside, one of the fighters tilted its wing again, a signal to a cockpit. The plane adjusted course. The ground below was now the East Coast, lights glittering faintly through the dark. They were approaching restricted skies. Athena's mind raced. She had lived invisible for years, but now the past had dragged her back into the light. The question was no longer whether she had been found. It was why now. Why did Washington suddenly care about Athena again? She knew the answer was waiting at the end of this flight. The engines hummed steadily as the cabin settled into a tense silence. Passengers clutched phones in hands, waiting for answers that would not come. Athena folded her guidebook shut and slid it back into the seat pocket. Her tourist act was finished. The role had served its purpose, but the game was up. As the moonlight streamed across her face, she allowed herself the faintest whisper, so soft only she could hear. Not a tourist. Not anymore. In Washington, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Inside the Situation Room, Screens glowed with maps of the eastern seaboard. Red icons pulsed where military aircraft had taken formation around. Flight 223. Voices overlapped in urgent tones. A Pentagon officer read the updates aloud. Passenger flagged under call sign Athena. Boarding confirmed at JFK. Identity matched with Level 1 clearance protocol. The National Security Advisor leaned forward, his knuckles pressed against the table. Athena was supposed to be gone. Buried. Why is she in the system? A younger intelligence officer replied quickly. Her clearance was never officially retired. Someone kept it alive. Probably buried it so deep it was forgotten until tonight. Not forgotten, the advisor muttered darkly. Preserved. The president's voice cut across the chatter. Calm, measured, but heavy. What's the risk? A silence followed. Then a CIA director spoke. If it's her, she knows things we've worked decades to bury. Treaties, deals, operations never acknowledged. If she speaks, it won't just embarrass us, another interrupted. It could destabilize alliances. And if she's here on purpose? The room fell silent. The president exhaled slowly. Then she's either the greatest gift we've been handed, or the most dangerous liability in the air tonight. Either way, she lands. Alive, orders were relayed. The Air Force tightened its escort. Homeland Security prepared the runway, and the FBI scrambled a team to meet the flight. But aboard Flight 223, the passengers had no idea of the weight of those conversations. The cabin buzzed with nervous energy, whispers tumbling seat to seat like wildfire. Some swore they'd seen armed men at the airport. Others muttered about hijackers, about terrorists, about bombs. Every explanation grew wilder, more fearful. The flight attendants' smiles had cracked into pale masks. They walked the aisles, briskly, urging passengers to remain seated. One clutched the intercom phone too tightly, whispering instructions she couldn't share aloud. The young college student at the window was still recording, his phone angled shakily. This is history, man, he muttered breathlessly. Jets right outside the wing. Wait till I post this. Athena sat motionless in 22C, her expression calm, but her senses sharp. She didn't need to hear the whispers to know the target of their fear was her. Already, she'd seen the glances. Already, the two watchers in first class had confirmed her identity. The only question was when someone would approach. She didn't have to wait long. From the cockpit door, a man emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and a dark suit that didn't quite hide the bulge at his hip. He wore no flight crew badge. His stride was steady, purposeful. A federal marshal. Passengers fell silent as he walked past. Even those who didn't know who he was felt it. The authority, the danger, the inevitability. Athena's eyes tracked him without moving her head. The marshal's gaze swept the cabin. He wasn't searching blindly. He knew exactly who he was looking for. His steps carried him down the aisle, like a hunter closing in on prey. When he reached row 22, he paused. His eyes locked with hers. Recognition, confirmation. He leaned down, his voice low but firm. Ma'am, I need you to come with me. Gasps erupted nearby. A woman clapped her hand over her mouth. The college student froze, his phone slipping from his fingers. Athena didn't move immediately. She let the silence stretch, feeling the tension thicken around her. Passengers stared openly now, eyes darting between her and the marshal. There. Imaginations filled in the blanks. Terrorist, spy, criminal. Finally, Athena unbuckled her seatbelt with slow precision. She rose gracefully, her every motion deliberate, controlled. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't need to. The marshal gestured for her to walk ahead. She did. Murmurs followed her down the aisle. Who is she? What did she do? Oh my God, is she dangerous? But she ignored them. Her focus was inward, steadying her breathing, recalling the flashbacks that had already begun haunting her. Flashback. A narrow street in Prague. Rain-slicked cobblestones. She walked under a black umbrella, a briefcase in hand. At the corner cafe, a man in a gray coat awaited her. His smile was thin, his eyes cold. Do you have it? She had. A document signed in secret, a deal struck in shadows between nations pretending to be enemies. If revealed, it could collapse governments. If destroyed, it could spark war. She had been told to deliver it to Washington. But someone had intervened. Someone powerful. The briefcase vanished, the mission unfinished. And with it, Athena disappeared too. Now, years later, her unfinished work had found her again, thousands of feet above the earth. The marshal guided her toward the front of the cabin, where first-class passengers stared in confusion and fear. The two watchers exchanged another glance, but did nothing. Their job was complete. She was identified. The rest would unfold in Washington. The captain's voice broke over the intercom once more, brittle with strain. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We will be landing shortly. Please stay seated. But calm was impossible. The sight of a passenger escorted by a federal marshal, while fighter jets shadowed the wings, shattered any illusion of routine. The cabin buzzed with speculation, fear, awe. Some passengers reached for their phones, but the attendants were quick to intervene. No recordings, please. Phones down. Their words were ignored. Athena walked steadily, eyes forward, posture unbroken. She looked every inch the tourist still, but the truth pulsed beneath the mask. She wasn't being arrested. She was being reclaimed. The marshal guided her to a seat near the front, close to the cockpit. He sat beside her, his posture rigid. He didn't speak further, but his hand rested lightly near his weapon. She noted it. She noted everything. In her mind, the pieces aligned. The escort, the watchers, the marshal, the president's orders. This wasn't about containment alone. This was about access. Someone wanted what she carried. The question was whether they'd treat her as a guest or as a prisoner. Outside, the F-15s held their perfect formation. Beyond them, invisible but inevitable, Air Force One streaked across the sky. The paths were converging. Athena closed her eyes, centering herself. When the wheels touched the ground, the game would change forever. For the passengers of Flight 223, this was a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. For her, it was simply the moment her past returned in full force. And she knew Washington wasn't ready for Athena. Not again. The seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice followed, clipped, constrained. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Washington. Please return to your seats, fasten seatbelts, and remain calm. We expect a smooth landing. Smooth. The word rang false. Athena sat near the front of the cabin now, the marshal beside her. His posture was tense, every muscle wired, but his eyes never left her. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. His presence was a formality. If she wanted to vanish, she could, but she wouldn't. This wasn't the time to run. Around them, passengers buzzed with nervous energy. Some clutched rosaries or whispered prayers. Others stared wide-eyed at the windows, watching the F-15 escorts cut through the clouds like silent predators. The college student from row 22C was whispering to anyone who'd listen. They took her. That woman, she's the reason I knew it. The rumor spread fast, mutating with each row it touched. She's a spy. She's a terrorist. She's a defector. Fear gave birth to stories, and stories grew teeth. Athena ignored them. She watched the subtle shift in light as the plane angled downward, dipping into lower clouds. The moonlight fractured into mist, and the city's glow began to pulse faintly in the distance. Washington, the place she had left behind, and the place she was being dragged back to. The marshal finally spoke, his voice low enough not to carry. "Do you know why they're bringing you in like this?" She turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. "Because they're afraid." He stiffened, then masked it with silence. Athena let the corner of her mouth curl into something that wasn't quite a smile. She knew fear when she saw it, not in him, but in the way entire governments moved. Fear wasn't just emotion. Fear was infrastructure. On the ground, Andrews. Air Force Base was alive with activity. Floodlights blazed across the runway, illuminating armored vehicles and black SUVs lined in perfect formation. Tactical teams fanned out in precise positions, rifles slung, eyes sharp. Helicopters circled above, blades slicing the night. Inside a mobile command center parked at the edge of the tarmac, generals and directors argued in clipped tones. "We cannot allow her to disappear again. She's not a prisoner. If the president treats her like one, this could backfire. She is a prisoner. You know what she holds. Do we even know if she still remembers?" "She remembers." A heavy silence followed. They all knew what Athena had carried, once knowledge of operations that had bent the world's balance. Of power. If she spoke, entire governments would tremble. If she stayed silent, she was still a ghost who couldn't be ignored. The president's motorcade was already en route. His advisors argued furiously about optics. Why Air Force One? Why such visibility? But the decision was made. If Athena was to be met, it would be at the highest level. No delegation, no middlemen. Back in the sky, the descent sharpened. The aircraft rattled faintly, pressing bodies against seatbacks. The captain's voice wavered as he made another announcement. "We'll be touching down in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." The attendants tried. Their voices quavered as they hurried passengers into compliance, checked belts, and collected stray cups. None of it mattered. No one believed this was an ordinary landing. Athena tilted her head, catching the faint hum of engines outside. Different now. Louder. Not just the F-15s. Something heavier. Through the window, the outline emerged. The unmistakable silhouette of a VC-25. Air Force One itself, flying at a parallel course. Gasps swept the cabin. Passengers pressed their faces against the glass, snapping photos despite frantic protests. From attendants. "It's Air Force One. The president's here?" Oh my God, why? Athena didn't need to ask. She knew. The president wasn't waiting for her on the ground. He was arriving with her. The marshal shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Even he hadn't expected that. He leaned closer. "What are you to them?" Athena turned her gaze back to the window, her voice low and steady. "A question they can't answer." The cabin grew darker as the plane pierced the last layer of cloud. Below, Washington glittered like a jeweled circuit board, its monuments glowing pale in the night. The Potomac curved like a dark ribbon, leading the way to Andrews. Passengers fell into stunned silence, staring at the Capitol. The weight of history pressed through the windows. They knew, without knowing why, that their lives had become footnotes to something far larger. The marshal spoke again, almost grudgingly. "They're afraid of you. Why?" Athena closed her eyes briefly. Images flickered across her mind. Flashback. A conference room in Brussels. A map spread across the table, dotted with circles. Of red ink. She stood over it, briefing men who never admitted she existed. "If you move troops here, they'll counter here. If you sign this agreement, they'll sabotage it from within. But if you play them against each other, if you promise." Both sides the same prize, you can bend the outcome. They had listened. They had followed her guidance. And history had unfolded exactly as she predicted. Borders shifted. Treaties collapsed. And through it all, her name remained a ghost. Until she walked away. She opened her eyes again, staring at the marshal, because I know where the bones are buried. And who put them there? The marshal swallowed hard, turning his gaze back to the aisle. The landing gear clunked beneath them, vibrating through the floor. The descent sharpened further. Passengers gripped armrests, bracing themselves. The fighters outside adjusted. Position, 2 breaking off while 2 remained tight on the wings. The runway lights of Andrews blazed into view. Gasps filled the cabin. On the ground, rows of flashing lights stretched endlessly, military vehicles, convoys, spotlights. This wasn't a landing. It was an arrival. The captain's voice cracked through the intercom. "Flight attendants, please be seated." The plane roared lower, wheels seconds from contact. Athena's pulse remained steady. She had prepared for this moment her entire life, even if she hadn't known it would come this way. The plane touched down with a screech of tires. The cabin jolted violently. Gasps, a cry, then the relief of steady rolling. The escort fighters broke formation, banking away into the night. Applause started weakly, a nervous habit, but it died quickly. No one clapped for this landing. Through the window, passengers stared at the impossible sight. Floodlights, convoys, soldiers. Air Force One on a neighboring runway. History unfolding under their feet. And in Seat 1C, Athena sat in silence, her eyes fixed forward. The marshal exhaled, tension bleeding into his voice. "Welcome back to Washington." Her reply was barely audible, but sharp enough to cut through the hum of engines. "I never left." The cabin doors hissed open, releasing a gust of cool night air into the pressurized space. It carried the scent of jet fuel and damp asphalt, mixed with something heavier anticipation. Passengers leaned into the aisles, necks craning, phones lifted despite warnings. The floodlights outside painted the night in harsh white, illuminating the impossible sight. Armored vehicles, tactical units, black SUVs lined like chess pieces, awaiting a move. Beyond them, the unmistakable silhouette of Air Force One glowed under its own pool of light. For a moment, no one moved. The marshal's hand pressed lightly against Athena's arm, guiding her forward. She rose with the same unhurried grace she had carried throughout the flight. No protest, no hesitation. Her calmness unnerved those around her more than any resistance could have. Whispers surged. "That's her. She's the one." What did she do? The college student from row 22C whispered into his phone camera, eyes wide. "They're taking her off first, whoever she is. She's the reason the jets were here." Athena stepped into the aisle, walking toward the open door. Every passenger's gaze followed her, a silent jury of strangers, their fear and curiosity pressing like a physical weight. The jet bridge was absent. Instead, a mobile staircase had been rolled into place. Floodlights bathed it in sterile brightness, turning each step into a stage. Athena descended slowly, the marshal at her side. Cameras clicked from distant lenses, their flashes lost against the blaze of artificial light. Soldiers stood at attention along the tarmac, their faces expressionless, but their hands tense on their rifles. At the base of the stairs, a small group waited. Men in suits, earpieces coiled behind their ears. A general with a chest full of ribbons. And at their center, a figure in a dark overcoat, the president. He did not extend a hand. He simply watched as Athena approached, his expression unreadable under the wash of light. Flashback, a narrow office in Washington, years earlier. Athena stood across from a man she had once trusted, a mentor, a handler, His voice was low, urgent. "They're cutting you loose," he told her. "The mission's compromised. You're expendable now." Her jaw tightened. "After everything I've done?" His eyes flicked away. "Orders from above. You know how this works." And she had known. She had always known. In their world, loyalty was transactional. Service ended when usefulness did. She had walked out that night, not as an agent, not as Athena, but as a ghost who would never come back. Now, years later, here she was dragged back into the light by the same machine that had abandoned her. The marshal stopped beside her at the base of the stairs, waiting for instructions. Athena lifted her chin, her gaze fixed on the president. For a brief second, time folded, and she saw both the past betrayal and the present demand in one image. The president finally spoke, his voice carrying easily in the tense silence. "Welcome back, Athena." A ripple moved through the officials gathered nearby. Some stiffened at the call sign. Others lowered their eyes. The name carried weight. A ghost resurrected in public view. Athena's reply was soft, but carried steel. "I told you I was done." The president's jaw tightened. "And yet here, you are." Behind them, the rest of the passengers pressed against the cabin windows, watching the impossible unfold. Some recorded furtively, others simply stared, their lives forever marked by this night. One woman whispered to her husband, "That's not a tourist. That's something else." On the tarmac, the general stepped forward, breaking the stalemate. "Sir, we need to move her immediately. This area is exposed." But the president held up a hand. His gaze never left Athena, not yet. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We thought you were gone. Why reappear now?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I didn't reappear. You dragged me back." The words stung, though. His expression didn't show it. Around them, advisors shifted nervously, glancing toward the press lenses hidden in the distance. This wasn't just an operation anymore. It was history, unfolding under too many eyes. The marshal shifted uneasily beside her. "Sir, with respect protocol." The president silenced him with a glance. Then, turning back to Athena, "You still carry things we need." Her reply came sharp, precise. "And you still fear what I carry." The standoff stretched, silent except for the distant hum of engines. Air Force One loomed behind them like a waiting witness. Finally, the president nodded once to the general. "Secure her transport," quietly. Athena raised a hand lightly, halting the movement. "If you drag me away in silence, the world will invent its own story. Is that what you want? Another ghost? Another rumor?" The president's gaze flicked to the passengers still watching from the aircraft windows, their glowing phones raised. The story was already escaping, no matter how tightly they tried to contain it. Athena continued, her voice steady, cutting through the night. "If you wanted me forgotten, you shouldn't have let the call sign live." The general bristled. "Enough. Take her." Two agents moved forward, but the president raised his hand again, stopping them. He studied Athena for a long, quiet moment. Then, in a voice low enough for only her to hear, "We can't bury you this time, so we'll use you." Her eyes met his, calm, unblinking. "You'll try." Floodlights glared. Soldiers shifted. Engines rumbled. The air was thick with expectation, as though the entire city were holding its breath. The marshal placed a firm hand on her arm again, guiding her toward the convoy. Athena didn't resist. She walked forward, each step measured, deliberate. The stage was set. Behind her, the passengers of Flight 223 watched history vanish into black SUVs and flashing lights. They would never know the full truth of what they had witnessed. But Athena knew, and so did Washington. The ghost had returned, and the balance of power would never be the same. The SUV door slammed shut behind her, sealing Athena in a cocoon of tinted glass and heavy silence. Outside, the convoy roared to life, engines harmonizing in a low growl that shook the tarmac. Floodlights shrank behind them as the vehicle surged. Forward in formation, tires hissing across wet asphalt. Inside, the air was cool, metallic. The marshal sat to her right, posture rigid, his hand never far from his weapon. Across from her, a man in a gray suit adjusted his tie, his expression composed but his eyes restless. She knew the type career. Intelligence, polished but brittle. He broke the silence first. Athena. He said the name with care, as if it might shatter. You've been gone a long time. She studied him without speaking. His face was new, but the lines around his eyes carried the same hunger she'd seen in countless others before him. Hunger for control, hunger for secrets. He leaned forward. We don't want conflict. We just need what you know. Athena's lips curved faintly. If you needed it so badly, you should have protected me when I had it. The marshal glanced between them, uneasy. The tension in the car was taut. As wire, the gray-suited man pressed on. That document in Prague, the one you disappeared with. It's resurfaced. Leaks, whispers. Someone's trying to finish what you started. Her gaze sharpened. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she mastered it. That document was never supposed to survive. And yet it has. He slid a folder across the seat toward her. We intercepted fragments. Enough to know it's dangerous. Enough to know you're the only person alive who understands it fully. Athena didn't touch the folder. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what it contained. The treaty drafted in shadows, the promises made between rivals, the betrayals scripted into its margins. Knowledge that could unravel fragile alliances. Topple leaders, redraw borders. The marshal finally spoke, his voice low. If this leaks? The gray-suited man's answer was grim. If it leaks, governments will fall. The convoy sped through the night, past highways cleared of civilian traffic. Helicopters shadowed them above, spotlights sweeping across dark fields. Athena leaned back, her eyes half closed. For years, she had carried the weight of silence, burying her past under false names and forgotten places. And now, silence was no longer an option. Flashback, a safe house in Vienna. Late night. She sat at a small table, the briefcase beside her, its lock unbroken. Across from her, a man she once trusted poured 2 glasses of whiskey. You could end wars with this, he said softly. Or start them, she replied. He had smiled, and in that smile, she saw the truth. He wanted the latter. That night, she vanished, taking the document with her. She had thought she destroyed it, thought she buried the danger forever. But ghosts, like her, had a way of resurfacing. The SUV jolted as it turned sharply, entering the secure perimeter of a government compound. Floodlights flared again, illuminating barbed fences and watchtowers. The convoy slowed, engines growling as gates yawned open. Athena opened her eyes, her voice calm. If you think locking me in a room will solve this, you haven't learned a thing. The gray-suited man's jaw tightened. You don't have leverage anymore. We control the leaks. We control the narrative. All you have is memory. Athena leaned forward slightly, her gaze like a blade. Memory is exactly what terrifies you, because memory is the one thing you can't erase with fire or ink. The marshal shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't sure if she was a prisoner or the most dangerous weapon they'd ever handled. The SUV rolled to a stop. Doors opened. Armed men waited outside, their rifles gleaming under the floodlights. Athena stepped out first, the night air cool against her face. The compound loomed like a fortress, concrete and steel, built to contain. Secrets too heavy for the world. As they guided her inside, she spoke without looking back. If the document has resurfaced, you don't need me to read it. You need me to explain the parts you'll never understand. The parts you were never meant to see. In a stark conference room, under the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, Athena sat at the head of the table. Across from her, a half-circle of officials leaned forward like vultures, their eyes sharp, their pens ready. The president entered last. He didn't sit immediately. He studied her for a long moment, then took the chair opposite hers. "Athena," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of the public weight it carried on the runway. "Why didn't you finish the mission?" Her answer was steady, unflinching. "Because finishing it would have broken the world you are trying to save." Silence. The officials shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. The president's expression didn't change. Athena continued. "You wanted to manipulate enemies into allies, to play both sides into submission. But the cost was too high. The betrayal's too deep. The moment that treaty was signed, it would have guaranteed not peace, but collapse." The gray-suited man leaned forward. "And yet you kept it." "I kept it because one day someone would need to know the truth. And now you've proven me right." The president exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing. "So what happens now? You walk back into our lives with secrets that could unravel everything. What do you expect us to do with you?" Athena's reply was quiet, almost gentle. "You don't control me anymore. You never did. You can keep me here, parade me in shadows, try to bury me again. But the truth doesn't belong to you. It never did." The words hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. The officials whispered, argued, fumed. But the president only watched her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he rose to his feet. "She's not a prisoner," he said firmly, silencing the room. "She's a reminder, and she stays close." Gasps, protests, but his word was final. Athena leaned back in her chair, her eyes calm, her voice steady. "You're right about one thing. I am a reminder. A reminder that some ghosts never rest." Outside, dawn crept slowly over Washington. The convoy dispersed, the floodlights dimmed, and the passengers of Flight 223 were quietly escorted away, sworn to silence they would never keep. But Athena remained. The tourist in seat 22C no longer existed. The ghost called Athena had returned, and Washington would never be the same again.